Welcome to Valuable Coaching. Please check us out on social media, Valuable Coaching on Instagram, Facebook, Valuable Coachee1 at Twitter, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Today we have guest Jeff Hendershot from Laverne University. And now let's get to the show.
All right, welcome to Valuable Coaching today. Thank you guys for joining us. We're lucky today to have Laverne head coach Jeff Hendershot with us, and Kevin's going to go ahead and give him his introduction.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce to you guys Coach Jeff Hendershot. Coach Hendershot grew up in the Claremont area. He went to Claremont High School, where actually he met his wonderful bride and now wife, Serene Hendershot. They have a wonderful daughter, Amelia, who's about probably 3 years old now. And after Claremont High School, where he played a little bit of baseball growing up, then he got really into volleyball. He went to the University of the Pacific, played outside, and was an opposite. After the University of the Pacific, he graduated with a sports management degree, went and coached at Laverne, went up, and we'll talk to him about coaching at University of the Pacific. Sadly, the program was cut while he was there, so he had to go through that. And now he's back at Laverne as the head coach. So, Coach Hendershot, it's great to have you. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, good to be here. And Kevin, you forgot, I was a libero as well.
That's right. You were. And you probably set in practice at one point.
In practice.
Yes. That's great.
All right, utility guy. That's good.
Utility. But
Yeah,
like,
it sure was.
Not one of those like fake utilities, like he's utility. He's like actually really good at every position.
Yeah, it's actually, well, Kevin brought up a point. You played some baseball. That's one thing we've kind of started off with each coach is most people have a little bit different story. I think we've only found one person so far that really started with volleyball as kind of their first sport. So why don't you give us a little bit of kind of an intro into how you got into volleyball?
Yeah, I got into volleyball because I had just some friends who were trying out. And my freshman year, I started playing baseball when I was like 5, 6 years old, T-ball. I did karate, I did all kinds of stuff kind of growing up. And by the time I got to high school, I was just kind of over the baseball thing. I'd been playing travel ball for like 7 years. And my dad was adamant that I was not going to be in a band and do nothing. So he's like, you got to play a sport. And I had a couple of buddies who were trying out for the volleyball team in the spring. And they're like, hey, just come out. And, at that point, I didn't know boys played volleyball, if I'm being completely honest with you. And I went out and, I could jump high and, I was pretty athletic. So the coach found a spot for me. And, freshman year was kind of whatever. I played club after that, going into my sophomore year, and it just hooked me. And from then on, I probably played volleyball every single day until probably a couple years after I graduated college.
So, Coach Hendershot, when did you realize that you wanted to be a coach? When did that dawn on you?
Yeah, first of all, Jeff, not Coach Hendershot.
All right.
Yeah, no, like all through college, I got a sports management degree, but I knew I probably wanted to stay in education. And I remember, Coach Jeff Hall, who's over at Hawaii now with, the Sand. And he pulled me in the office like halfway through a season. He's like, hey, I know you want to maybe teach. Like, what are you going to teach? And, I was like, Coach, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I want to get through the season. I'm playing ball right now. And he's like, well, what do you know better than volleyball? And that was honestly like an eye-opening, like light bulb went off. And I was like, nothing, So he's like, you should absolutely, he was like, you should absolutely coach. He's like, you have a mind for the game. You're smart. You're a good player. He's like, do it. That's my suggestion. And it stuck with me. And after I graduated, I, moved back home and I started coaching club in high school and, I became a volunteer for Laverne and, that's that.
I remember that, Jeff, because you came home. We were roommates in college. And when you came home, you're like, Coach Hall just told me that I should coach. I'm like, yeah. Like, I mean, I knew I wanted to coach when I was 4 years old. But for you, like, that's great. I remember that. Like, it was yesterday. I was like, I think I'm going to coach. Kevin was like, oh, you'll be great. You'll hire me one day.
Yeah. And that was seriously like it was a moment, because I really didn't know. And, I'm pretty academic, I like school, that sort of stuff. But I was upset to play volleyball, and that's what I was focused on. And that was kind of the first time where I had some direction on, on post-college, career, type stuff. So.
That's great. You talked a little bit about burnout with baseball. Do you like finding athletes that play multiple sports and that can kind of enjoy doing multiple things? And then also, could you speak a little bit about just kind of club volleyball and sometimes, how burnout can happen with some of those athletes as well?
I love multi-sport athletes, and I know we'll get into it, but I think one thing with D3 that we can do is we can have multi-sport athletes, and I have a couple on the roster right now who do track as well as volleyball. I'm completely open to basketball players, kind of doing both seasons. I just think, going into club, you get so specialized. These kids start playing volleyball at 7 years old, like I did for baseball. And you can see in their movement patterns and the way they think about the game that they just don't have well-rounded athletic abilities. They can shuffle well, but they can't throw. If you can't throw, you can have a bad arm swing. And, all that you can tell kids who've played multiple sports, and for me, like when I hear, that an athlete, or a potential student athlete has played a bunch of different things and maybe they found volleyball early or late, like I'm not concerned with that as much because I think if you learn to use your body in a lot of different ways, you're going to learn new ways to use your body, more quickly, and so I'm all about it. I don't have anything against kids who start, volleyball, and that's the only thing they do. But I found that the ones who've done multiple sports, tend to be just a better athlete in general, and for club, I think they all start too early and play too much. I really do. I think burnout's a huge thing. And the club season is so, Southern California, it's 9 months. It's like, it's impossible to not get burnout a little bit. I know for me as a coach, I get burnout, and so as an athlete, it's got to be the same.
So you've been around some incredible coaches, incredible mentors, played for some good coaches. What coaches have had a huge positive impact in your life?
Yeah, I think that's one area I've been really lucky. I've had really good coaches. I mean, and even going back to like T-ball, like Coach Smith and, Coach Screener, like I can remember having good coaches who just taught like really good discipline, a good foundation on fundamentals of whatever we were working on. Then going through club, I had Jack Coberly and Sean Douglas, who I'm both close with today. And then, up through Wortman and Dan Fisher and Jeff Hall, like I've just had coaches who, they were just good. And what made them good, and it wasn't necessarily always their X's and O's, is the understanding of an athlete, and that there's more to being a good coach than just understanding the game. Being personable, understanding your players, understanding what makes them tick, all that sort of stuff. Like that's the magic right there. Because I think, like, especially volleyball, I don't feel like it's a super tough sport to teach. If you compare it to like football or something like that, it's not that complex. But what is complex is like, you're dealing with 6 people who never stop a ball, so then teaching them how to work together and to have that, that communication and the nonverbal communication, like that's where the coaching magic happens, I think, in our game.
I mean, I worked with all 3 of those college coaches that you talked about, Dan and Jeff and Joe. And that was one. I don't remember a lot of the X and O talks, but a lot of the things with having quotes of the day and them pulling you in the office and talking to you honestly about things, those definitely stick. And how do you try and now do that as a coach yourself and implement some of those things so you're making sure that you're taking care of your players, kind of on and off the court?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just talk to them, conversations. I try really hard to get them in my office whenever possible. And, I remember being a freshman, sophomore, it's like the last place I wanted to go was down the hallway to, to Joe's office because, he was the boss and he was in charge. So I really try, and before practice, after practice, I'll walk into the training room, and again, taped up and stuff, and, just say hi, see how they're doing, ask them about school. Just, I try and be personable, and then because when we're in the gym, it's, it's business. I'm not trying to be anybody's friend for sure, but every second outside of that, it's getting to know them as people, and that really starts recruiting as well.
Well, Coach, I'm curious if there's some viewers maybe, obviously what's happening with Stanford is pretty sad, and I think you're unfortunately a unique guy to talk to about this because you've been in the trenches, you played at Pacific, get asked to go join Coach Wortman's staff, I mean, he, as we know, we've had him all on the show. There's a great coaching tree that Coach Warman has. I mean, there are some really good schools and colleges, and you were on that trajectory, which you still managed, and it all worked out. But second day you were in work there, Joe notified you the team was cut. And can you go kind of through that process of how you dealt with the kids, maybe what Stanford's going through right now? I know it's a deep layer question, but give us your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, the process of having a program, discontinued, cut is brutal. And, for me, like the day that I met the team was the day that they found out that the program was being cut. So my first interaction with the team was in the champions room, when the AD came in and Joe had to tell them like, hey, this is it. This is your final year. So like my first sentence to them was, hey guys, like you can't control this. All you can control is how you respond to it. And, it's going to be a journey, and that was hard, and I think, especially for Stanford, I mean, that is a perennial all-time men's volleyball program, and, the pandemic and, there's a lot of other stuff to it, but there's no easy way around it, and for me, like I went recruiting to the high performance championships in Florida a couple of weeks before, I moved up to Pacific, and I think it was like the second or third day that I moved up there, Joe, had me for lunch and kind of let me know what was going on. And then I think the next day we met with the team, and then it was a decision like, okay, this is in August, September. He's like, all right, the season's going to continue. We're going to have our year. And then the team is done at the conclusion of the season, so, Joe, to his credit, he's like, Jeff, what do you want to do? He's like, if you want to leave right now, by all means, go for it. He's like, if you want to stay, then stay. I'll leave that decision up to you. And, for me, I just feel like I made that commitment to the group. And, I just thought like, what it would feel like if I was a player to have, volleyball taken away from me. And I was like, as much consistency and support, is going to go the longest or go the furthest. So I decided to stick it out, and it was brutal. It's tough because especially for us, like we knew what was coming at the end of the year. Season was over, the program was over. And so you're trying to take the day to day and, stay focused and stay motivated and keep getting better, but also knowing like there isn't a tomorrow, in the big sense. So it was hard.
You obviously had an impact on them, because I remember naturally I went to a few more games than I made the track up to Pacific a few times last year. So it's like 5 games that year. And you made a huge impact on those kids because they really respected you. And I knew a lot of them because I just had left Stockton, so I knew a lot of the players still. And, it also really made me happy how many student athletes that you coached were at your wedding, and like that's important. And like they were there, like, hey guys, so in that little time you had, it's that role at Pacific, you obviously hit a home run and made a huge impact on those kids.
Yeah, and it was cool because I don't remember. I think I was like 26 or something like that. So I wasn't significantly older than them, but I had graduated, I didn't play with them or know any of them in that way. So I was in a really good sweet spot as like an assistant coach where I was young enough to be able to really empathize with them and understand and, be very, very familiar what being a student athlete at Pacific was like for that team, but also like, having a profession and knowing that I was a coach and I was in charge and, I had to run things. And so there's a really good spot right there where like, I got to know them and we bonded over the situation because it was hard, but also like, we were still trying to win. And for them, it went from like, how good of a Pacific volleyball player can I be? It's like, hey, let's get as good as I can be because I've got to transfer, I've got to find a new home. Every game I'm playing is a tryout, for a different team or something like that. And that was kind of something that we really helped them along with too.
I think it shows great leadership too. I mean, like you said, you're not that much older than them. Like Kevin said, your wife was still staying down in Southern California. So, I think you set a great example for them. So, I mean, that had to leave a huge impression. You could have easily just walked away, especially at that age where you had, would have had other opportunities and to stick through it, that had to stick with all of them too and show them kind of the right way to be loyal to something. So that's that's kind of what we've been finding is all these coaches are leading by example, and that's something may seem small, but that's had to have made a huge impact.
Yeah, and I think it did. You could tell they appreciated just, it was really easy for them to feel abandoned, and just like not supported, and like they didn't have, no one had their back, and so for me that was really important. And obviously from a selfish perspective, like I got to coach the MPSF for a year, like I got to coach against, SPRA and like all those big guns, and I got to like, I think that was Coach Marv's last year with Pepperdine, so I got to like, talk with him for 10 or 15 minutes, before that match, and really learn from what I think are literally some of the best coaches in the country at the highest level of the game, arguably like even internationally. So, there was that part of it for me too. It was like, hey, maybe this is my last shot, and this is a pretty sweet spot to be in where I get to kind of rub elbows with these coaches and get a little bit of wisdom from them.
Yeah, definitely. One question I have for you is, you, like I said, everyone's journey is different, and everyone's journey is a different type of path. You went from Laverne to Pacific. Obviously, Coach Jen probably had empathy and sympathized for you and said, man, that is a tough break. Really cool that she brought you back on her staff when that season was over. And then, you definitely grinded and worked hard for her, but then she left and wanted to do an administrative position, which is cool. And then you got an interim role. And I remember talking to you about it because I was an interim once, but not at the level that you were. But being an interim, you can feel at times like a Band-Aid, and it's just, you're like a substitute teacher, and can you describe what was it like being an interim, or what advice would you give to coaches that were interim coaches?
Yeah, I think being an interim was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And for me, I'd been with Laverne for, combined, I think 5 or 6 years at that point. And so I knew I wanted the job. I wasn't being an interim just to like fill a gap. It was like they let me be interim because it was like, you've been here a long time, you deserve a shot to coach for the year. And so like I just said, for the boys who are auditioning, every day, it's like I took this job as interim, was like, hey, every single match and every single practice is a tryout where I get to prove like how good of a coach I am. And so little things, I know, Kevin, like for you, like wearing a tie to matches, it's like, hey, I'm going to make sure that my administrators and my team and the people in the stands and my opponents, like I'm dressing up for this. Like it matters to me. I'm going to respect the game by, being professional, and, so you're always on, which is always the case when you coach, but you can feel it because for me, I was like, hey, I need to make playoffs. Like I need to make playoffs. I need to show that right off the bat, I can do that. And I need to beat, a big conference opponent, and I need to show that I can establish a culture and a training regimen and, all those sorts of things that make for a good volleyball program. And I have 5 months to do it, and, I think one thing for coaches, if you've been an assistant in the program, you become the head coach, like that chair is different. And when you're running the show and you're in charge of scheduling and, academic checks and, the strength and conditioning, for some people, I don't have to do that, but it's like the amount that gets thrown on your plate that you don't realize head coaches take care of is significantly different, and it's not that it's hard to do necessarily, but you add that on top of the, 10 hours of film and practice planning and team meetings and all that sort of stuff. It's, it's a load, but it was good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. You obviously did a really good job because I remember, I always root for you Tigers, and, you're one of my best friends, and I would follow you guys closely. You had a really young team. You were like starting, but that was what was cool when we'd have those conversations. It's like, you gripped it and ripped it. You did not, you're like, I'm going to go, I'm going to play this team like as if I'm going to coach them in the future. And this is what this program needs at this time. And if I was an AD, I'd admire that because maybe you could have, I don't know, maybe done a different route for playing time with kids to maybe make the kids happy or whatever. But you didn't do that. You went and did the job, and you ended up getting it. So that's great.
Yeah. I mean, there are times I think we had 5 freshmen on the floor.
Wow.
You know, I had a senior right side and a senior setter, you know, and then at points everyone else was a freshman, you know, or a sophomore. And, you know, going back to like how you coach it, there are definitely moments in that year where like I could have maybe put out a better lineup, but had to given up on like some of my coaching morals and philosophy. You know, like someone skipped practice, like you're not playing. And I know if I don't play you, that's not our best lineup. And it might mean we lose. You know, but when you have that decision, it's like, okay, if I become the head coach, that, you know, the team's going to remember that, you know, and they're going to know. And so there are a couple of those where, you know, I had to think long and hard about it, but it was like, no, I'm going to run it like it's my program. And I want to be able to look back on that decision next year when I'm the head coach and be like, look, guys, I'm not messing around. You know, if you skip weights, if you don't go to class, if, you know, you have a bad attitude and you're causing drama, like those are all reasons for playing time, you know, and it'll affect you. So.
Authenticity has been one of the key words we've gotten from most of these coaches. So obviously you had to be yourself, no matter what the situation was, and it worked out for you. Do you think having that the interim role first maybe set up some good habits for you because you were trying to make sure you were just that little bit extra on every single day?
Yeah, I think it really made me reevaluate everything, you know, because I became interim, I think in July, like officially interim in July. So I had, you know, 6 weeks to make, okay, what am I going to be as a head coach? You know, I've been an assistant coach for a long time, you know, but there's a big difference in being like, hey, when I'm the head coach, I think I'll do it like this, as opposed to I am the head coach and I'm going to do it like this. You know, so I think it did set a lot of good habits. I learned a ton, you know, it's a little thing, but, you know, I've filled out a lineup sheet 10,000 times, but when it's your first time as a head coach in a college match, you're like, all right, like, don't forget the libero, you know, and make sure you put your signature, or like, you know, hey, we're going to start in rotation 3 instead of 1, you know, like count it out. Like all those little things you just, you know, you take for granted when you're the assistant. You're just sitting there like, come on, dude, like put the lineup on, let's go. We gotta get this match started. But, you know, I think more of habits and stuff is, you know, I've always been big on film and scouting reports. And, you know, I knew that I wanted to make that a cornerstone of our program, you know, the preparation and making sure that when I designed practices and we set up the week, you know, depending on who we were playing, that, you know, the preparation and the detail and that sort of stuff was something that the team could tangibly see every day that we were taking care of, you know, and also being very aware of what I was saying or not saying, you know, because when you're the head coach, eyes and ears are on you. And if you're silent about something, that can say as much about, you know, when you're screaming or yelling, you know, and I think all of my head coaches who I've coached for, they were really good about giving me a voice as an assistant. And so I really wanted to make sure I did that for my assistants. You know, I told them like, hey, if you're on staff, I trust you, I believe in you, like, you know, see you high, let it fly if you need to. And if I need to rein you in, I will. But, you know, don't be afraid to coach. Like you got to give feedback. You're not here just to stand on the sidelines and, you know, count kills. You know, so those are some things that I knew I wanted to make sure that I was doing as a head coach, and I did it. And now I know kind of ways I change it to make it better. But I definitely established those things for sure.
It's so funny you mentioned the lineup card, because like I filled out the lineup card probably like 10 times wrong before in my career. And then I'm very typical. I go, when am I meant to do that? And like I go like, and then I'll call a quick timeout and I'll just be like, yeah, they just don't know what's gonna hit them. And like I think I'm like 7-3 in those matches, but I'm at such a low level. I'm like, all right, this works. Just set this guy every ball. We're fine. And like, every coach has that story. That's funny.
Everyone screwed that up for sure.
Yeah, some more than others.
Good. I'm glad I'm not alone.
I didn't get that many, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's the assistant's fault. No, I'm just joking. Yeah. And then, so one question I have for you is, I think, you know, when we interview, obviously Chris Thomas at Illinois, I get it. They're on the Big Ten. You can study his program pretty quickly. Cal, same thing, but you have such a sweet league. The academics of your league is like hands, it's amazing. And your league, can you kind of go, you can even talk about other universities you want, but why is your league unique? What type of kids is your league looking for? And it seems to me that you guys every year, whoever wins your league is a contender for the national championship.
Yeah, I mean, in our conference we have Cal Lutheran and Claremont McKenna, CMS, and they've both won the national championship in the last 5 years. And so in years past, Laverne, we've been making NCAAs, and our conference is definitely one of the top 3 or 4 in women's volleyball for Division III. And, like you were saying, academically, it's very academic. Occidental, CMS is Claremont McKenna, Harvey Mudd and Scripps, and the Claremont colleges, those are all top 10 academically. Laverne, we're an academic institution. I don't know if we compare with like the CMSs of the world, but, so for our conference, actually, I'll speak for me, I'm looking for players who can get scholarships and choose a different route. So it's like, if you're that NAI D2, really, low level D1, where you're good enough to get, money to play volleyball, but you choose a different type of experience, and we were kind of talking before, it's like, if you're a Division I volleyball player and you're going to play volleyball, it's like, you're going to eat, sleep, and breathe the sport. I think a D3 athlete, when you're in season, that's the case, but, during winter and during spring and during summer, NCAA rules really hold us back. We're only allowed to practice for 5 weeks in the non-traditional season, which is everything other than, our competition season. So as a student athlete, you really get the opportunity to dive into academics, and you can study abroad, and you can get a part-time job or an internship or those sorts of things, So I think for all of us in our conference, we're trying to find that volleyball player who's good enough to get money, but wants a different experience than the all-in volleyball Division I, or, high level D2 and that sort of stuff. So that's a challenge, because you're asking someone to pay for school when they can have it paid for them, at least in some way, and so I know for me, like the way, scholarships work in D3 is you can't get any money for volleyball, but the schools only do a very good job of giving merit money, based off of your academics, GPA, SAT, ACT, that sort of stuff. So I'm looking for smart kids who are going to get good merit scholarships that's going to help alleviate the cost of going to a private institution, and, who are playing on those top level club teams and could get money to play volleyball because they're that good, and they're just choosing, the different experience that Division III provides.
That's awesome. I mean, I think a lot of young athletes, they see Division I as like, I don't know, the promised land. And there's so many different types of opportunities out there. And I know I've tried to explain this to some student athletes, and some just seem to be so set on Division I. How do you go about selling some of those kids that you're talking about that are, maybe they are good enough to go play at a Division I school, and what's kind of your pitch that you give them to kind of pull them away and tell them like, hey, this is going to be a better, more well-rounded experience for them?
Yeah. And I think just like with schools, you have the kids who have varying degrees. I mean, you have your top level D1 athletes. It's, that's a done deal. But with the ones who are borderline, it's really like, what experience do you want? Like, obviously you love volleyball, but are you going to want to maybe travel abroad at some point during, your time in college? You're not going to be a professional volleyball player. Do you want to have the opportunity to go get a part-time job and get, like I was saying, an internship, or to do those things? So, what I tell them is like, look, when you graduate, you're going to have a resume. Okay. And if you don't do it right, you're going to have an empty resume with a degree, which is worth nothing now. So it's like, you need to make sure that if you're serious about what you're doing after college, you've got to pick an experience that's going to allow you to grow in more ways than just volleyball. So it's like, you need to make sure that you pick a place and an experience where it's like, you're going to have a resume with some job experience to help you get that first time job. And I know for me, when I was graduating, I didn't get that. I didn't understand how that, like, a degree wasn't just going to get me a job in a profession and a career, and it worked out because I became a volleyball coach, and that's exactly what I got. But, I wanted to go into business and stuff, I didn't have anything. It was like, I had a volleyball, background and I had a degree, but it wouldn't be enough, to really dive in. And so I think really just getting them and their parents to understand the bigger picture, because some of them are, they're like, hey, I want a volleyball scholarship and that's what I want to do. And if that's your thing, then great, go for it. But if you're a little more well-rounded, if you're thinking a little more about the future and kind of really what life is going to be like after college, I think our experience really speaks to those types of players.
I was going to say, as you mentioned parents, like my brain as a parent kind of popped on like, those things you're saying about being able to get a job and have a more well-rounded resume, those things, like those would really resonate with me as a parent. Do you try and involve the parents maybe a little more than you would at maybe a Division I school, because you kind of have that sales pitch that maybe the kid at their age won't quite grasp yet?
Absolutely. I have my communication, and, if I'm really serious about, an athlete, or even if I'm not that serious, if we're just talking, I have an email or a letter that I send them, that's to the parents, of, Kevin Pratt. And I kind of say those things, it's like, here's what we're trying to do here at Laverne. And the other thing I really tell them, and this is, I think, true of any, good college program, is like, we're going to take care of your kid. It's like, we're going to be that other, authority figure. And, going back to what good coaches did for me is I knew I could rely on my coaches for stuff other than volleyball. If I had questions about, where I need to go to get my car serviced, or if I just didn't understand the way something was going, I knew that my coaching staff was there for me. And that's the other thing I tell them. It's like, look, I'm going to make sure that your kid graduates in 4 years, or 3.5 if we can, because college is expensive and you need to take care of business and get your stuff done and get out of here, and those sorts of things. I think parents are super important, especially for us. Like, they're probably paying the bill. So they feel good when they're involved in what's going on, because they have a big say in it. It's like, if the parents aren't about it and don't trust what you're doing, they're going to be at home in the recruit's ears saying like, hey, we don't know about that program, about that school, about that coach. So I think the parents are huge. And I think that kind of differs from D1 and also with the club culture now. I think parents expect to be more involved because they're so much more involved in their, for us and their daughter's experience, that I think that's an important and a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's good. You covered a lot. You're too humble though, man. Jeff, like, I remember when you were in college, you were president of sports marketing club, you volunteer with Coach Wortman. I dragged you to PSAC meetings and you got president. And then you have an MBA. So you did just fine, young man, but stay humble. That's good about you. And then I think you bring up a really good point though, because even at the Division I level for men's volleyball, which I think is a great sport, but you're right, we're not playing professional afterwards. Usually there's some elite guys that do, but studying abroad is not part of the equation. And winter break, we don't have a winter break. Like, we go home for like 3 days and then come back and train. I think at the Division III level, honestly, I that is something all my family members did. They studied abroad, and they get to talk about it. And my study abroad trip was Lincoln, Nebraska for a semester. Anyways, I think it's interesting how you've done a good job with hiring assistants. I think it's so fascinating, the Division III level, that I wanted you to talk about, because you probably don't have the resources or funds like to pay someone like $60,000 in full benefits. What type of assistance do you get? Who have you gotten to be your assistants? What's the expectations? What someone, if they wanted to get involved in coaching, what is the commitment for being a Division III assistant coach?
Yeah, I mean, even for me, when I was the assistant here, like, I was working full-time at a volleyball club, so I think, D3 varies so much. I mean, the really high-end top D3s, I mean, they are paying full-time assistants and that sort of stuff. You've got the D3s that, I mean, have a head coach and that's it, and I think Laverne, we're making huge strides to really, facilitate that. So we're actually moving into like a full-time paid assistant coach in the next year or two. We have graduate assistants, so for me right now, my assistant is, her name is Randy. And so she's a full-time PE teacher, during the day. And then, we practice in the later afternoon. So then she comes, after her full-time job and and coaches for me, and so that's how we're able to kind of bridge the gap financially, where it's like, she's a professional, she's a teacher, and then she wants to coach volleyball, and the graduate assistant is the same thing. Her name is Destiny. And what's crazy actually is they're both former players of mine at Laverne. And I didn't necessarily want it that way. Randy was a high school coach for 7 years, really high level, her teams made it, into CIF and the state and stuff. So she's an accomplished coach on her own. And my GA Destiny, has been coaching club and coach high school in the area. And they're just both people who are good coaches and developed themselves since they played. And, when I became the coach, for me as the interim, I was like, I need people I can trust who, can take care of business. I don't have to babysit, and who are going to help me, move this thing along. Because, like I was saying, if I get 1 year tryout, you have to trust the people who are helping you. You got to trust your help, period. It's like, I can't worry about if they're going to say the wrong thing or act inappropriately or teach something that I don't like. So going to answer your question about what type of coach, like a lot of D3 assistant coaches are there for the passion of the game. They're definitely not going to make a career out of being an assistant Division III volleyball coach. But normally it's like, hey, I have a job and I love volleyball, and I want to coach at a higher level than like club, or high school or something like that. So they find their local, Division III, volleyball program.
That's good. That's good advice. I mean, I think a lot of coaches don't know what different paths are available for them. Just like we said, a lot of kids don't know what paths are available for them to coach at. I know Kevin and I were actually kind of talking about that a little bit before we got on with you today. Just how it's kind of an unknown path of where to go. It's great that Jeff Hall was able to kind of point you in that direction and give you a little push and maybe give you some guidance. I don't know. Should we fire off some quick questions?
Yeah, we can do some quick questions. Before we do that, though, my last one is for the question part is, what's your most fulfilling part of coaching? What gets you up every morning and what fires you up to do this wonderful job you have?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, I'm a competitor, and I love competing, and, winning and losing is the best and worst thing ever. And I think coaching is a huge part of allowing me to have that outlet. And the more I coach, though, the more it's the developing of players, and I think I wrote this in like my cover letter for the thing. Is my favorite thing is like seeing a player and being like, ooh, they're not good enough yet, and they can be. So it's like, let's figure it out, and I think for me, that goes into my coaching philosophy, where it's like, I'm not a dictator, and I don't believe that like I have the best way ever, and the only way to play successful volleyball is the way I say so. I really think it's like, hey, I think I have a pretty good idea, and I probably have a better idea than you do to start, but let's have a conversation about it, and if for some reason your 4-step transition footwork isn't working for you and you want to do a back shuffle instead of a pivot, it's like, well, let's figure out if we can find something, between that and what I want, or prove to me that you're good enough to do it. And if you're having success and you're able to terminate and do what we got to do, then we can make that work. I think it's figuring out the puzzle and getting them involved and kind of seeing the progress over, their career. That's super fun and exciting.
That actually makes me think of something that I'd like to ask you is, I don't know if you've seen it over your coaching career, if there's been a shift at all, but have you noticed either with kids that you've gotten or maybe ones that you've recruited where they almost just expect the coach to tell them what to do? And when you do bring up that conversation with them and you try and involve them in that, do they get kind of confused and not quite, they just want to be told what to do and go do it?
Absolutely. They get mad. They're like, just tell me. I'm like, well, if I just tell you, you're going to forget and you're going to screw it up anyways. It's like, figure it out. That's a big thing. I'm like, what do you think? And they're like, oh, what do you mean? What do I think? Like, well, what do you think? What did you see? What did you feel? What do you think that situation calls for? And as a coach, it's so frustrating to coach that way sometimes because the answer and it's obvious, and to you it's not that hard of a question. But I think the problem is, again, like developmental wise, they are just told and they just regurgitate information or steps and stuff that they don't understand why they're doing it or where the value in the technique or in the process or whatever it is comes from. And so when they get to me, sometimes they're like, like, dude, just give me the answer. Like, just tell me what you want. And it's like, well, no, I'll see you tomorrow. Think about it. And, it definitely can be frustrating for them, definitely. And, for me, I know that I'm not going to get results maybe as quickly as I want them, which is definitely tough for us, because we don't get a ton of training time, but the results stick, and it's like, I don't find myself having to teach things over again when they kind of go through that process. But for sure, I mean, they don't like it initially at all. Like, they don't like it at all.
Well, it's so cool, Jeff, to hear, because what I have found, it's been really cool. We've got to talk to a lot of really high successful coaches. And one thing we've all said after each time, like, what did you think about that? We're like, the best ones are just authentic and they're themselves. And I have the pleasure that I lived with you for 4 years, so I know you pretty well, and I was your college teammate. And people would ask, who's Jeff? What's he like? I'm like, hey, he's kind of like the man of wisdom. He's very philosophical and he's very smart. You can even tell with your answers, but that's you in a nutshell, like how you'll deal with a student athlete. And that's great, because like at the end of the day, that's what you should be. Like it's your program, like it's the kids too, but you're running the program. But yeah, we're gonna fire some quick questions to you. If you have like a sentence or two answer, that would be ideal, and we'll fire away. So what do you think about strength and conditioning programs?
Love it. Vital. So important.
That's a great short answer. All right. Again, quick thoughts on multi-sport athletes.
Great. I think the more experience an athlete can have, the better off they're going to be.
What's the best thing going on at the Laverne volleyball program?
Me being the head coach.
That's quality. I don't know where to go from there.
That's great.
Got you guys on that one.
Yeah. It threw us off a little.
That's like when Todd Hollenbeck, I'm sorry, we're like, Todd, what's the best thing that's happened to you at volleyball, and why did you want to be a coach, and what is motivating you? He's like, it's when Sam Crossan told me I wasn't good enough and I'll never play. And the next week we interviewed Sam.
Yeah.
And it was like one of those answers. All right, I got one for you. What position is the most important in volleyball in your opinion, and why?
Setter, yeah, because they run the show. I think then middle, but setter first.
How do you go about recruiting a good setter then?
You just got to watch them a ton. Watch them and talk to them. I think that's the biggest thing. If they're going to run your show and run the program, they've got to be coachable and be on the same page as you. And you just don't know that unless you really get to know them.
It's interesting you said middle as the second one. Why would you go with the middle as the second?
Well, okay, it's probably outside just because of sheer point scoring and stuff. But I think middle, if you have a middle that understands really good vision and blocking, it really makes defense a lot easier for your team. And if you have a solid middle attack, it opens up every other position on the floor. If you have a middle that's up in transition every single time that can terminate, your outsides go one-on-one, your right sides go one-on-one, it opens up that back row attack if you have it. I think any team that's had a great middle, it makes life easier. And if you have that, it really opens things up on the floor.
No, I love that answer. I didn't want to throw you off at all, but I found having a middle, even at like a JV level, that can get up in transition when they buy into getting up every time and hitting, it makes life so easy. And once they see it too, then there's that buy-in. So that I think that's actually a great answer. I think middle sometimes gets a little underrated.
It's so fascinating, you guys. I mean, one thing that's fun about being around you guys is you guys think differently than me. And I think if you have a high level program, every position's really good, but that's like, duh, but maybe because I'm an outside hitter, a lot of my teams, and maybe it's the level I'm at because I'm doing high school boys volleyball, but it's like we live and die with the outside, et cetera. And and I find my middles, it's great and we work with them, but that's kind of like the positions where, of course, we have a stud that's going to UC Santa Barbara and Northridge. You're like, sweet, you're right, you're in the middle. But I find at middle, at the level I coach at, you just get a basketball player, a really good track athlete to just go and move laterally really well and try to generate 2 kills, don't net, and maybe get a few touches. And then we're going to set the outside 50 balls, and we're going to go 31-2, on the season. But it's cool to hear your answer, in all honesty.
Well, no, and I agree with that. I mean, let's be honest, you're not going to be a high level program if you don't have good outside hitters. Yeah. But I think if you had two teams with similar setters and similar middles or similar outsides, the team with the better middles is going to win. Yeah. So it's like, if you're at that level already, there's got to be something that's going to differentiate you. And I think a good middle attack and a middle that can really put up a good block and doesn't get burned, very often, that can make a big difference, because you're going to have to block at some point, and bad middles can't do that.
Yeah. And don't forget about the libero, or the most important position, serving sub. That's what I did for 4 years. It's a very important position.
Hey, no, Kevin, you're right. Libero is becoming one like the setter. It's like, if you don't have a libero that can cover a lot of space, and especially now, like, be a really good second option as a setter, if you have a setter back row digging, you're going to be in trouble, because the expectation now is out of system, you terminate. And if you don't have a libero who can put up a good second ball for your pins, like that's a real disadvantage.
Yeah. So last quick question for me, other than volleyball and other than Coach Jeff Hendershot, why should a student pick Laverne?
We're a small campus that has a great community. I mean, the professors, the administrators, everyone on campus is all in on the student experience. And, for you guys, it reminds me of Pacific. It's like, when you go to Laverne, you're part of the Laverne family, like across the board, and you're going to meet people, and you're going to grow, and you're going to create those lifelong relationships that I know for me are what made college, what it was. And that's for sure the best thing about Laverne.
Awesome. I guess my last question that we've been trying to touch on is, it's unique because of right now, I guess, but what have you been doing to kind of keep your team engaged throughout, lockdowns or any restrictions? Because it's been interesting to see differences in how coaches have handled this.
Yeah. Going back to your guys' Division III conversation, we have very different rules than the rest of NCAA. So for us, what they've done is they said you only have 114 days of any sort of team activity. So if we do anything, a phone call, a Zoom, if we text, email about volleyball, that counts as a practice day. So we have to be really strategic about what we do. And like, we're allowed to check in on our athletes, and all that sort of stuff. But, so that's been hard, so we've been doing, a lot of Zoom stuff. I don't really do like Zoom practices per se. I think trying to teach volleyball through a computer is not the best form of teaching, and like, it's really going to stick, so we do a lot of kind of mindset, culture, funny stories, like we start off every Zoom meeting with like one of the players being responsible for asking like one question, anything they want, about life, and we just all answer it, so it kind of goes back to the relationship side of it. For me, it's like, I don't know how much I can really do or expect them to do to like shake off not playing volleyball for a year, so for me, it's like, let's get the team to be as well-rounded and get to know each other as well as they can. So when it is time to get back on the floor, there isn't that getting to know each other as a team component. We have that already. We know each other. We're a family. We're all in. Now it's just, shake off the rust and do what we can do to win some volleyball games.
Yeah. And Miles might have more for you, but just so you know, you already know this, but, it's been very fun. I met you when you were 15 years old. Yeah. Man, I've almost known you for 20 years. I was honored you had me in your wedding, and you even let me speak at it, which is nice of you. And yeah, and
it was
great. What are you guys talking about? But one thing I really admire about you is you're willing to share, and it's great. When I go to Bishop's and show them, like, check out this cool slideshow I have, or this cool volleyball notebook. I mean, I give them your credit. I go, this is Coach Jeff Hendershot from Laverne, but it's just so detail oriented, and it makes me look very scholarly, and I really appreciate that. And or like whenever I started recruiting, I remember you were really good to me, as you should be, but you would help me a lot, and I don't forget that. And I think anyone who plays for you, I've seen it. It's just been great. I've seen you in practice. I've seen you run a practice, doing good stuff, and I think it couldn't happen to a better person, and you're that's a great gig for you. And I think you're really happy. And I think you're going to do some really good things at Laverne. I'm excited to get my Laverne polo that you still owe me. And I'm excited to go to the tent and watch you guys play when the world's
Come to the tents.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to say thank you. It was great to be able to talk with you. I do remember watching you play, and I came to one of those matches that last year when you were coaching at UC San Diego, and that had to be a hard year. That was it was sad to see that happen, but I'm glad it helped you find your path to something that seems to be working out really well for you. So thank you so much for giving us your time. If you have any final thoughts, you can go ahead and give them now, but it's been great.
No, it's good to talk volleyball, and I think you guys get this from the men's side of the game, and it's starting to happen more in the women's. I think just sharing information, and it's, I think what we do shouldn't be like closely guarded secrets, or copyrighted information. I think it should be like, hey, let's all figure out the best ways to train and do these things, and may the best person win. But I think doing these podcasts and that sort of stuff that you're doing is great, because the more info we can get out there and the better everyone can be, the better our game is going to be. And that's what matters. So this is great. Thanks, guys.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We appreciate you having you on, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you guys play some volleyball at some point in the coming year.
Yeah.
Big thank you to Jeff Hendershot for being on with us today. Thank you for listening to Valuable Coaching. We want to thank our sponsor, One Stone Apparel, onestoneapparel.com. Check them out. They got these great logos, great vocab tees, great prices. So check them out at onestoneapparel.com.